Nestled in a plain in modern-day Iran are the remnants of a fabulous ancient city, Persepolis. Built some 2,500 years ago, it was known in its heyday as the richest city under the sun. Seized and burned by Alexander the Great's conquering army, shaken by uncounted earthquakes, damaged by 25 centuries of rain and fluctuating temperatures, Persepolis, the greatest of the royal residences of Persia, is now an ancient ruin. Yet today, thanks to recent works by some of the most renowned archaeologists and experts on Achaemenid art and history, and a touch of imagination, we've been able to recreate the halls and palaces of Persepolis in all their dazzling splendor. Perhaps we can now see why Persepolis was once known as the richest city under the sun. The Achaemenid Persia occupies a very important place among the great civilizations of the ancient world. Two centuries before Alexander was born, the Persians formed the largest empire the world had ever seen. The Persians were essentially a nomadic branch of the Indo-European family who migrated to the Iranian plateau. In 550 BC, Cyrus, a Persian chieftain and one of those rare leaders towards whom one cannot help but gravitate, laid the foundation of a very unique empire which was built on a model of tolerance and respect for other cultures and religions. So much so that the Old Testament regards Cyrus as the savior of the Jews from Babylonian captivity. And Xenophon, the 4th century BC Greek historian, refers to him as a man of wisdom, resilient spirit, and guilelessness. Cyrus was also famous throughout the ancient world for his love of gardens. Recent excavations at his capital city, Pasargadae, and the discovery of irrigation canals for his vast royal gardens support this fact. Cyrus's gardens were called Paradisa, where life thrived and water was the essence of life. From the Persian world, Paradisa, we have inherited the evocative word of paradise in English. After Cyrus, Darius the Great elevated the Persian Empire to its zenith. The empire now extended from the borders of India in the east to Greece on the Mediterranean, down to Egypt and Ethiopia in Africa, and up to what is now Russia and Eastern Europe. "28 different nations were brought together under the rule of a man who was hailed as the King of Kings. To administer this vast empire, the Achaemenid kings established not one but 4 capital cities in various strategic locations: Babylon, Susa, Ecbatana, and finally the most magnificent of them all, Parsa, or as the Greeks called it, Persepolis.
The original name of this site, the Acropolis as well as the city, was Parsa, mentioned in the inscriptions of the Achaemenid period. And when Alexander came here, according to his own historians recorded by Diodorus, this was the richest city under the sun.
Persepolis was founded around 518 BC. At first, a huge platform covering more than 125,000 square meters was created from giant blocks of stone. Then the majestic structures were gradually built and expanded in the span of more than 50 years during the reigns of Darius and his successors, Xerxes and Artaxerxes I. Clues to understanding the function of Persepolis are carved in its walls and staircases. They show the different peoples of the empire who came to Persepolis with their finest gifts to present to the great king.
To this remarkable ceremonial center of a vast world empire, there came on New Year's Day, the vernal equinox on the 21st of March, many peoples, representatives of the various satrapies or governorships which Darius had established in the empire. They brought different gifts, lapis lazuli, bowls, and ewers. They brought their animals. They brought all sorts of things, from the Ionian Greeks to the Egyptians, the Babylonians, the Indians.
Here, an African representative carries an elephant tusk while leading an okapi, exotic presents from the farthest regions of the empire. Fortunately, a number of objects that are quite similar to those depicted in Persepolis reliefs have been found in various countries, which were once part of the Persian Empire. For example, the representatives of Bactria present highly valued bowls, perhaps made of gold. This 20-centimeter wide gold bowl, now at the Iran National Museum, is similar to those illustrated at Persepolis. It is engraved at the rim with King Xerxes' name in Old Persian, Babylonian, and Elamite, the three languages used for formal cuneiform inscriptions. The distinctive locks of hair dangling behind the ears of these men distinguish them as Lydians. In his book, Anabasis, Xenophon tells us that armlets were among the items considered gifts of honor at the Persian court. One of these men is carrying a similar armlet. Opposing griffins, once inlaid with semi-precious stones, adorned this armlet that is part of the cache of treasures found near the river Oxus. The Oxus treasure, as it is known today, is on display at the British Museum. Across the ages, fine, colorful textiles and beautiful carpets featured high in the Persian way of life. This long traditional love for varying colors and attractive designs could be seen almost on every artifact. From the largest carpet in the world, with an area of about 5,000 square meters, to the more regular ones in a typical Persian bazaar, or even among the nomadic handicrafts. Going back to Persepolis, we can see Babylonian representatives who carry, among other gifts, lengths of textile, possibly made of wool. Actual pieces of textile dating to the Achaemenid period have also been found. This piece of textile, along with the famous Pazyryk carpet, were frozen and preserved under heavy ice in southern Siberia, now on display at the Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg, Russia. The 28 horsemen woven into the Pazyryk carpet also remind us of those reliefs at Persepolis, which depict the grand royal audience.
It must have been a grand occasion to see the various people walking up the stairs, coming into these wonderful stone palaces, bringing their gifts in the presence of the king, each delegation led by a Persian or a Median noble, presented to the king, and then the explanation of what they brought, and then the festivities began, celebrating the New Year's Day, which was symbolized by the lion devouring the bull, the new year ending the old year, according to many scholars. This was Persepolis.
Thus, Persepolis was not a military or political capital. It was first and foremost a majestic ceremonial complex where representatives of 28 nations and satrapies of the Persian Empire gathered and celebrated the highest feasts in the presence of the king. The formal presentation of gifts confirmed the loyalty of the subject nations and the power of the king. The procession towards the king followed a specific route through the complex, intended to maximize the impact of the architecture.
Anyone who was allowed to come up the terrace was completely astonished. He has crossed a rich plain and he's now facing a huge terrace more than 14 meters high. which is covered with many beautiful and magnificent palaces. He was facing something he had never seen before. Each visitor would then proceed towards this astonishing monument.
Access to the complex was through the Gate of All Nations. Two gigantic bulls reminded the guests that they were entering the heart of the Persian Empire. Every visitor in ancient times who was allowed to enter this hall must have been in total awe. The dignitaries and delegates who had come from all over the empire assembled here and were seated on a glittering bench of black, marble-like stone. Then the military officials were guided to pass through the eastern gate and proceed towards the 100-column hall. While the gift-bearing dignitaries were ushered towards the great audience hall. Each delegation was guided by a Median or a Persian official towards the Royal Audience Hall, or Apadana. Crossing this vast imperial platform, the dignitaries who came from the four corners of the empire approached the largest and most splendid palace of the royal complex. A series of steps in the north and east provided access to the hall.
En arrivant de la porte de toutes les nations, les visiteurs étrangers et les représentants des provinces.
Coming up to Apadana, the visitor is quite impressed by the size of the columns, which were about 20 meters high. His heart is beating faster and faster. Then, passing through the giant doors that were 18 meters high, he would enter the huge audience hall. He can see a forest of columns, the multicolored carpets on the floor, the beautiful decoration of the walls, a huge ornamented roof, and finally, in the background, we would ultimately see the king himself seated on his throne.
splendid atmosphere and beautiful ornamentations of this hall must have astonished everyone. Part of the original colourful glazed bricks used for the ornamentation of Apadana towers still remain today. More astonishing were the 12 capitals of the eastern portico, which were quite unique in the whole complex. They were in the form of roaring lions. Gift receiving at Persepolis was how the Persian kings reinforced the loyalty of their subjects. But they had other methods to manifest the glory of their global empire.
The Persians showed their magnificence and the vastness of their empire in many ways. Their glory, their power were manifest in every part of the empire, which had many nations under its banner. There were 30 nations under Darius's rule, and Darius and his successors made every effort to make these people prosperous and happy.
As an administrator and a builder, Darius was brilliant. And I gave order to dig this canal from a river by name Nile, which flows in Egypt to the sea which goes from Persia. In Egypt, he had a canal dug between the Nile and the Red Sea, anticipating the modern Suez Canal. More important was the construction of the Royal Road, stretching about 2,600 kilometers. This road connected Susa and Persepolis at the heart of the empire to Sardis and the Mediterranean shores. This great highway and other network of roads had relay stations at regular intervals, which not only facilitated secure trade and commerce, but also expedited communications through an efficient mail system by the fast-riding letter carriers. These messengers would change their horses at each station and could therefore reach their destination at the shortest possible time. This was in fact a prelude to the Pony Express and today's postal system. It was also under Darius's rule that for the first time a standard weighing system was devised, and old Persian cuneiform script was invented. Simultaneously, gold and silver coins were minted and used throughout the empire. But their greatest achievement was the empire itself. The first global empire was built on a model of tolerance and respect for other cultures and religions that few great powers have ever matched.
Tolerance was the key word in religions in this vast Achaemenid empire. But it was not only tolerance of other religions, it was actually encouraging them. Even though they were Zoroastrians, the Achaemenid kings did not seek to impose their will on other peoples. On the contrary, they helped them. We all know how Cyrus freed the Jews from captivity in Babylonia so they could return to their homelands in Palestine. But this was not the only case. It happened later in the time of Ezra and Nehemiah as officers of the king who came back to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple. They did the same thing in Egypt and in Babylonia and among the Greeks of Asia Minor. In fact, they are the first example of international religious freedom that we find in the history of mankind.
The reliefs at Persepolis clearly depict this policy. The friendship between nations is masterfully shown here. There is no force or enmity. This atmosphere of peace and harmony is portrayed especially at Tripylon, where noblemen are depicted holding hands and chatting with one another. The Tripylon Palace was probably used by Achaemenid kings to hold council with high-ranking Persian and Median noblemen and state officials. It's therefore named by some experts as the Council Hall. Most of these noblemen carry lotus-like blossoms or flowers, while others hold round objects like apples or colored eggs, all of which are to this day treasured and associated with the Nowruz or New Year festival. And here is the Persepolis Treasury. The treasury, with its unique ornamented and imposing columns, was one of the first buildings to be constructed on the platform. What early Greek historians wrote about the wealth of Persepolis certainly was not an exaggeration. We learn from the reports of Diodorus Siculus that it was full of gold and silver and all sorts of riches. However, Alexander and his army did a very thorough job of looting and finally burning it down to ashes. Therefore, only a small number of objects which were overlooked by the Macedonians have been recovered. Uncovered in the debris of the treasury were hundreds of clay tablets with cuneiform inscriptions in Elamite.
This text says 11 karsha. Karsha is about 83 grams of silver, supplied by a man called Shaka, paid out by Shaka, to workers who are described as woodworkers who are making images at Persepolis. And it's an issue authorized by the treasurer of Persepolis, a man named Baradkama, in the 4th year of Xerxes.
These tablets clearly tell us that the workers at Persepolis were not slaves. In fact, the Achaemenid employed large numbers of men and women and paid them adequately in kind or cash according to their skills and nature of their work. We also know from these tablets that there were women supervisors as well.
In many instances, we have women who are called chief, Irshara, as the Elamite words in these tablets says. Sometimes they get double than men. If men usually get 3 units of grain per month, they get 5.
And that all the working women received special benefits for their maternity.
There are a whole series of texts that are special rations paid out to new mothers, to postpartum women. Payments that are meant to cover to supplement rations for a whole year.
The builders of Persepolis, gathered from all over the empire, were quite successful in producing one of the most splendid palatial complexes of the ancient world.
In terms of beauty, it's difficult to find the right word. It's a kind of architectural symphony. Everything is built to fit with one another. For example, several buildings of various sizes are set on terraces with different levels to make altogether a very beautiful and harmonized picture.
One of the more imposing palaces of Persepolis, whose ruins are still magnificent, is Takht-e, or the private palace of Darius the Great. This palace would have been dimly lit. The light would have been streaming through the windows. Since the stones everywhere were highly polished and thus reflected images, it is also known as the Hall of Mirrors. On the eastern and western door jambs of Takht-e, there are reliefs that depict the king in full regalia leaving the palace, followed by two special attendants. Another magnificent palace was the Hadish. With an area of 2,250 square meters, Hadish was King Xerxes' private palace. It was here that Alexander is said to have kindled his catastrophic fire. Therefore, of all the palaces in the complex, this one is completely destroyed. And even the bedrock foundation is burnt to the core. On the south side of Hadish was the Queen's Palace, where the royal ladies lived. Its western wing was reconstructed in the 1930s and today houses the Persepolis Museum.
While Persian monumental and decorative arts consist of elements from various parts of the Achaemenid Empire, they are unmistakably Achaemenid in character and composition. Nowhere in the Persian Empire this harmony is better and more masterfully showcased than in the palace complex at Persepolis.
The largest palace in the complex was the 100-column hall.
We are am now in the 100-column hall or throne hall built by Xerxes and finished by his son Artaxerxes I. It was a splendid monument with 100 columns, 10 rows by 10. The columns were all black marble stone with bell-shaped foundation and torus with the capitals in the form of double-headed bulls. It was a splendid monument of the ancient time.
This hall, also known as the Throne Hall, occupied an area of 4,600 square meters and could accommodate hundreds of dignitaries and military officials, as shown on its two northern door jambs. Here we can see 50 military officials, once shown from the left and once from the right. They add up to 100 officials who hold the throne. These are actually the military backbone of the empire and provide an exact analogy to the 100 columns of the hall. Persepolis was the ceremonial capital of the largest empire the world had ever seen. Darius the Great thus described it, "And I made it adequate, secure, and beautiful." But the beauty and splendor of Persepolis lasted only for 2 centuries. Its majestic audience halls and residential areas perished in flames when Alexander and his Macedonian army conquered and looted the city and its Acropolis in 330 BC.
Alexander was a Macedonian. He first subdued the Greeks and then, pretending to be a Greek, he came here destroying the Persian Empire.
When Alexander came from Macedonia, he was fully aware of the importance of Persepolis as the symbol of Achaemenid power, as well as its wealth and riches.
Starting from the destruction of the city of Parsa, killing and slaughtering its people, plundering its houses, then he came here and set fire to the palaces of Persepolis.
When they arrived here, the city was defenseless. Yet, they burnt the city and destroyed its palaces. Thus, the richest city under the sun was no more.